I've gone back and forth about writing this down, mostly because it sounds like the kind of thing people exaggerate online for attention. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I just need to put it somewhere outside my head. My name is Daniel Mercer, and this happened a little over a year ago. I still use the place where it happened. I just don't stay there after midnight anymore. At the time, I was preparing for a government job interview, and my apartment wasn't a great place to study. Too loud, too many distractions. Riverton Central Bus Terminal, on the other hand, had bright lights, free Wi-Fi, and a waiting area that was almost always busy. People assume bus terminals are chaotic, but during the late evenings they settle into a kind of predictable rhythm. I'd been going there 3 or 4 nights a week. The terminal officially closed at 11 p.m., but during the holiday season they kept the main hall open later for overnight routes. That night I arrived around 7. I remember because I bought a coffee from the kiosk near Platform C, sat near a charging outlet, and told myself I'd leave by 10. The place was normal. Families waiting with bags at their feet, students scrolling on their phones, announcements echoing every few minutes, cleaning staff moving through with carts that squeaked softly over the tiles. Nothing felt strange. I got absorbed in what I was studying. When I'm focused, I lose track of time easily. I remember vaguely noticing the terminal growing quieter, but I assumed it was just the natural thinning out as buses departed. When I finally checked my phone, it was 12:08 a.m. That surprised me more than it should have. I'd never stayed that late before. I looked around, expecting to see at least a handful of people scattered across the hall. There were almost none. A few buses were still idling outside, their engines humming low. But inside the terminal, most of the lights over the shops were off. The digital advertising screens had switched to a generic looping logo. I didn't hear any announcements anymore. The security desk was still lit, though. I distinctly remember seeing a guard there earlier in the evening. Middle-aged man, navy uniform, leaning back in his chair, scrolling on his phone. Now the chair was empty. The monitor glowed, casting a pale blue light across the desk, but no one was sitting there. I packed up my things and stood, telling myself not to overthink it. Night shifts change, guards rotate, people step away. That was when I noticed the woman. She was sitting on a metal bench across the hall, directly facing the platforms. I'm certain she hadn't been there earlier. I would have noticed, if only because of the backpack on her lap. It was small, child-sized, the kind with reflective strips and cartoon patches that had faded with age. She held it carefully, both hands resting on top of it, like it was something fragile. She wasn't crying, she wasn't rocking or moving. She was just sitting there, eyes fixed on the boarding area. My first thought was that she'd missed a bus, that she was exhausted. Parents look like that sometimes, empty, paused between decisions. I slung my bag over my shoulder and started toward the exit. As I passed, I felt an odd pressure in my chest, the kind you get when you're aware of someone watching you without turning your head to confirm it. I didn't look at her. Halfway to the doors, I realized I'd left my notebook on the bench. I turned back. She was closer now. Not dramatically closer, just a few rows nearer than before. I told myself I must have misjudged the distance earlier. Large spaces play tricks on perception. I retrieved my notebook and sat back down, planning to organize my bag before leaving. I could feel her presence, even without looking. The hall felt too quiet, like sound was being absorbed by the walls. That's when I noticed the clock. The large digital display above the platforms read 12:17 a.m. I zipped my bag, looked up again. Still 12:17. I waited, counting in my head, checked my phone, 12:20, looked back up, 12:17. A chill crept into my arms. Clocks malfunction, power glitches happen. I told myself that, firmly. Her voice broke the silence. "Excuse me." It was soft, polite, close enough that I hadn't noticed her approach. I turned. She stood a few feet away, still holding the backpack. Up close, she looked older than I'd thought. Not elderly, but worn. Her clothes were clean, yet outdated, like they belonged to another decade. Her hair was pulled back loosely, strands falling out around her face. She held the backpack slightly forward. "Have you seen a small girl with this bag?" Her tone wasn't desperate. There was no tremor in her voice. It sounded like someone asking for directions. I hesitated, then shook my head. "No, sorry." She nodded once. "Thank you." And she walked away, returning to her bench. I told myself that was it. Just a sad interaction that stuck with me because it was late and I was tired. I headed for the exit again. She was standing there, between me and the doors. I stopped short, my mind scrambling to piece together how she'd gotten ahead of me. The terminal was wide and open. I would have seen her pass. She looked at me and asked, in the same calm tone, the same words, "Have you seen a small girl with this bag?" Something about it snapped the air around us into sharp focus. It wasn't just repetition, it was the exactness. Same cadence, same expression, like the earlier conversation had never happened. I noticed a luggage tag attached to the zipper of the backpack. A name was written in faded ink. Beneath it, a date. The year was more than 15 years old. My mouth dried. I pointed toward platform F, toward a bus that was idling with its lights on. I think she went that way," I said. The lie tasted metallic. She followed my gesture, nodded, and turned. She walked slowly, deliberately, towards the platform. I didn't wait to see where she went. I pushed through the exit doors and stepped outside into the cold air. The buses were there, engines running, but the platforms were empty. No drivers, no passengers. Behind me, the doors slid shut with a mechanical click. I pulled on them instinctively. Locked. From somewhere deep inside the terminal, her voice carried faintly through the glass. "She's boarding." The world tilted. The next thing I remember clearly is sitting on a curb, my back against a concrete pillar. A man was crouched in front of me, asking if I could hear him. Another voice crackled over a radio. They told me later I'd been found outside, disoriented but conscious, that security cameras showed me standing alone in the terminal, talking to no one, then walking out and sitting down like I'd decided to rest. No woman appeared on the footage. Weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I asked a clerk I recognized if anyone had ever gone missing from the terminal. She stiffened, said she didn't know, said people talked too much. That night, I searched online. Years ago, a child disappeared from Riverton Central Bus Terminal, walked away from her mother during a crowded boarding call. Never found. The mother stayed for days, refusing to leave, asking passengers the same question over and over. Eventually, she collapsed. There was no record of her death. I still pass through that terminal. I just don't stay there long enough to answer questions anymore. My name is Sarah Klein, and this happened when I was living in Columbus, Ohio during my last year of graduate school. I'm not prone to panic, and I tend to assume systems work the way they're supposed to. That assumption is the only reason I'm writing this calmly now, instead of how I felt later. I was at Riverside Methodist Hospital on a Tuesday night in early March. I had twisted my ankle badly coming down my apartment stairs, heard a sound that suggested a ligament problem, and realized pretty quickly that driving myself home wasn't a good option. The emergency department was busy but not chaotic. I checked in, was given a wristband, and told to wait. My phone battery was already low, and my ankle had stiffened enough that standing wasn't realistic. I was seated in a wheelchair near the wall outlets, elevating my foot, trying to be patient. It was after midnight. The waiting room thinned out to a few people sleeping upright. I remember feeling relieved to be somewhere structured, somewhere with rules and procedures. That's when the nurse approached me. He wore navy scrubs and a badge clipped at the waist. He spoke quietly, professionally, and introduced himself as Mark, one of the overnight nurses. He said they were moving patients with orthopedic injuries to a quieter triage area so the ER staff could reorganize. His tone was steady and reassuring. He asked my name, confirmed my birth date, and glanced at my wristband. Everything about the interaction felt routine. I agreed without hesitation. He unlocked the wheelchair brakes and began pushing me down a side corridor I hadn't noticed before. I assumed it connected to imaging or overflow rooms. Hospitals are labyrinths at night. As we moved, he asked how I injured my ankle, whether I had any allergies, and if I was on medication. I answered automatically. He nodded, repeating details the way medical staff do when they're processing information. He said I'd likely need an X-ray, but that they'd get me comfortable first. The corridor was quieter than the main ER. The floors were the same polished tile, but the overhead lights were dimmer. We passed a security camera mounted in the corner. He adjusted his path slightly so we went under it instead of directly in front of it. I noticed, but I didn't attach meaning to it. Hospitals are full of blind spots. He stopped outside a small room with no window, just a solid door. There was no room number, only a laminated sign that said, "Staff." He apologized for the wait and said the imaging tech was finishing up with another patient. He told me to stay put and rest my foot. I asked if I could call my sister to let her know where I was. He smiled and said phones interfered with some of the older equipment back here and that it would only be a few minutes anyway. He offered to plug my phone into a charger outside the room so it wouldn't die. That seemed considerate. I handed it to him. He closed the door gently behind him. The room was empty except for a rolling stool and a blood pressure machine that wasn't plugged in. No exam table, no computer. The longer I sat there, the more details started to stack up in ways that didn't quite align. My wristband hadn't been scanned. No vitals were taken. No chart followed me. I told myself this was overflow protocol, that night shifts worked differently. After several minutes, I tried the door. It opened easily. The hallway outside was quiet, almost too quiet, with no foot traffic and no ambient noise from the ER. I could hear my own breathing. That's when I noticed the badge clip he'd been wearing earlier was still hooked to the door handle, empty. I don't remember making a decision so much as reacting. I stood on my good foot, ignoring the pain, and pushed myself back into the wheelchair. I moved down the hallway in the opposite direction we'd come from, calling out that I needed help. My voice sounded thin in the space. A janitor rounded the corner, startled. Behind him, 2 actual nurses appeared, responding to the noise. I tried to explain all at once that I'd been brought back there by a nurse named Mark, that my phone was gone, that something was wrong. One of the nurses asked for my chart number. When I told her, she frowned and said she hadn't seen my name come through yet. Security was called. My phone was eventually found plugged into a charger at a desk near the supply closet, unattended. No one could identify a nurse named Mark working that shift. They checked schedules, badges, even contractors. Nothing matched. The next morning, after my ankle was wrapped and I was discharged, I filed a formal complaint. Weeks later, I received a brief response stating that there was no record of an interaction matching my description and that all staff had been accounted for. The case was considered closed. I still think about how easily I complied, how reasonable every step felt at the time. What unsettles me isn't that someone tried to take advantage of me inside a hospital. It's that the system designed to track, verify, and protect simply had no place to put what happened. My name's Ethan. I'm 29, and I work remotely as a freelance editor. A few months ago, I decided to take a short trip to Providence, Rhode Island, to escape my cramped apartment in Boston. I thought it would be fun to spend a few days exploring the city's old neighborhoods, coffee shops, and most importantly, its libraries. I've always loved being surrounded by books. I booked a small Airbnb in the Federal Hill area, just a 10-minute walk from a historic library I'd read about online. The place was simple, a single-bedroom apartment in a brownstone building, but it was perfect for my needs: quiet, cheap, and close to my main objective. The first day was normal. I walked through cobblestone streets, explored small shops, and spent the evening in a cozy cafe. By the time I got back to my apartment, I was exhausted. I cooked a simple dinner and spent the night reading. Nothing unusual happened. The next morning, I decided to get an early start at the library. It was still dark outside when I arrived. Providence's winter mornings are cold and quiet, and the streets were nearly empty. The library itself was massive, with dark wood doors and stone columns. The moment I stepped inside, I felt that familiar calm libraries always give me. I wandered through the stacks for a while, losing myself in the silence and smell of old paper. Eventually, I found a small reading room tucked away in a corner. There were only a few other people there, just enough to make it feel normal, but still private. I settled at a desk near the window and began editing some manuscripts I'd brought with me. After a couple of hours, I realized the library was nearly empty. A few janitorial staff were moving quietly through the halls, and the regular visitors had mostly gone. That's when I noticed the door to the reading room behind me was closed. I hadn't paid attention before, but it wasn't just closed, it was locked. I assumed it was automatic. Maybe the room locks itself after hours. I shrugged it off and continued working, but a creeping sense of unease started to build. The temperature in the room seemed colder than the rest of the library, and the silence was now too quiet, almost suffocating. Then I heard it, a soft scraping sound coming from the back of the room. I looked up and saw nothing. Maybe a chair had moved? I told myself I was imagining it. But the sound came again, a deliberate, slow scraping across the floor, just behind the stacks. I stood up and walked cautiously toward the noise, my phone in hand. The reading room was small, so the sound shouldn't have been able to come from anywhere hidden. As I approached the back corner, I realized the librarian on duty earlier had disappeared. That wasn't unusual in itself. She could have gone to the back office. But now, the sense of being watched hit me like a wave. I tried to call out, "Hello?" My voice echoed strangely in the room, louder than it should have. No answer, just the scraping sound again, now closer, almost right behind me. I spun around and saw a small metal cart slowly moving on its own. My rational mind screamed impossible, but my gut told me something wasn't right. I decided I needed to leave. I rushed to the door, but the lock wouldn't budge. I tried everything, turning the handle, twisting, shaking it. It was like the lock had welded itself shut. Panic started to creep in. I banged on the door, shouting, hoping someone would hear me, but the library was eerily silent. Then I saw it, a shadow moving across the corner of my eye. Not a person, but the outline of a tall figure slowly pacing just behind the nearest bookshelf. I froze. My mind raced. Who was here? Was it the janitor? Some maintenance worker? I had no way of knowing, and my phone signal was weak. I crouched behind a desk and tried to think. The only thing I could hear was the slow, methodical footsteps coming closer, paired with that scraping noise. Whoever or whatever was in the room knew exactly where I was. Suddenly, a soft click. The door swung open. My instinct was to run, but the figure wasn't there. The hallway beyond looked normal, lights on, empty. I bolted. I didn't stop until I reached the main entrance, and even then I hesitated before exiting. Outside, the streets were quiet, almost unnaturally so. I never saw anyone. No one at the front desk, no janitor, no other visitors. My phone had signal again, so I called the local police and reported what happened. Officers searched the library thoroughly, but found nothing. No one had been there, no signs of forced entry, nothing unusual. Even the locks on the reading room appeared normal. I haven't returned to that library since. I keep thinking about the figure, the lock, and the way the room felt alive, aware of me. Every time I walk past it from the outside, I glance at the reading room windows. Empty, silent. But I still get that same cold, impossible feeling that something or someone was waiting for me inside that day.